Executive Director at the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center. And we are so honored that you are here with us, either virtually or in person, to celebrate the gift of the government of Japan to endow the Mansfield Chair in Japanese and Indo-Pacific Affairs. So, yay! So it's an honor to have you here. This is the first dialogue by the Mansfield Chair, and it is on rare earths and shared futures, U.S.-Japan cooperation in a new mineral age. But more than just a Mansfield dialogue, this is the celebration and the culmination of a long-held dream to animate the Mansfield legacy. That dream was first started by our founding director, Dr. Paul Warren, who's here. He rose back. He is the one that really started all this. And he is the one who understood the importance of the Mansfield legacy and worked hand in hand with Maureen and Mike, traveling to Japan and coming up with the bones of a plan that would endow a program in ethics and public affairs and U.S.-Asia relations with a focus on Japan. That it was critical to Maureen and Mike and to Paul that legacy be focused right here in Montana to serve the students of the University of Montana. Mike Mansfield had really changed his life when he came to the University of Montana, that he had had a troubled youth in Great Falls. He had lied about his age when he was 14 and served in 3 branches of the military. He worked in the Butte copper mines, and it was when he met Maureen who changed his life that he came here to the University of Montana, which was so life-changing for him as it is for so many thousands of students that we have educated over the decades. So Paul Warren started with this idea. We were founded by an act of Congress in 1983, but it was not until the government of Japan recognized the investment opportunities of endowing the Mansfield Chair that the relations between Montana continue to be strong, continue to endure because of a respectful and close relationship that has been cultivated over all this time. So I'd like to first recognize Consul General Yori Makoto. He is based at the Consul General. To the consulate in Seattle since October 2023, nearly 2 years. He was here in spring of 2024 to present this incredible gift of $5 million to the University of Montana, one of the first 2 endowed chairs at the university. He has had a long and distinguished career in the Japanese Foreign Service since 1990, serving in Canada, Indonesia, the Philippines, at the Japan Foundation. So we're honored to have him and 2 of his colleagues here. They are here to promote the JET program, which is an incredible opportunity provided by the Japanese government to study and work to teach English in Japan. And even though the program is nearly 40 years old, we've had 100 successful JET applicants from the University of Montana. So really a testament to the strength of our Japan Studies program, which is led by Dr. Brian Dowell, who is actually in Nara in Japan on sabbatical this year. So we're sorry he's not here because he was instrumental in working with the Japanese government to foster this gift. We have Dr. Kevin Mulholland, who is another Japanese professor here. We have Dr. Anna Renner-Behe, who is the chair of the World Language and Culture Program. We also have the interim dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, Christina Yoshimura. So the Mansfield Center is an academic unit of the University of Montana, but we partner very closely with our colleagues across campus. At the same time, we're one of the most externally facing units on this campus. If you look around the room, we have not only UM students, we have 25 students from Tohoku University, we have representatives of government, Congressman Tim Sheehy's representative, Cam Nita is here, we have City Council member Gwen Jones, we have members of business, we have educators, we have nonprofit representatives. It's a real testament to the power of the University of Montana and the Mansfield Center. So before I introduce Dr. Vekasi, I'll go over the schedule for this evening. Following her talk, we will have the opportunity for questions. We will alternate between the in-person audience and previously submitted questions by the virtual audience. And I'll introduce Dr. Vekasi. She's the inaugural Mansfield Chair of Japanese and Indo-Pacific Affairs. She comes to the University of Montana from the University of Maine, where she focused on trade and investment strategies and changing geopolitical environments and the political risk management of supply chains. She specializes in Northeast Asia and has spent years conducting research in China, Japan, and South Korea. Her current research examines how Japan, China, and the U.S. cooperate and compete to manage complex supply chains, focusing on raw materials and industries essential for the transition to green energy. I usually don't read the whole biography, but for the inaugural Mansfield Chair, I have to. So she received her PhD in political science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's taught at the New College of Florida, was a visiting research fellow at the University of Tokyo, and a Fulbright fellow at Tohoku University, where these 25 Japanese students are from. She's a member of the Mansfield Foundation's U.S.-Japan Network for the Future, and a Mansfield Blue Scholars Network, and a National Asia Research Program Fellow with the National Bureau of Asian Research. She was an academic associate at Harvard University's U.S.-Japan program. Thank you. There's a lot to say about her. And it just shows what an amazing hire we made. And I need to recognize Dr. Abhishek Chatterjee because he is the chair of the political science department, which is for tenure home. But he was also the head of the search that found Kristin. So let's cheer for Abhishek. That was a lot of fun. So final comment and fun fact, Kristin has come home to Montana. She actually grew up in employee housing at Glacier National Park where her father worked. So, finally, I am honored to invite you, Dr. Kristin Vekasi, to your inaugural dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming this evening. Particular thanks to Consul General Iori and to the members of your team that have come here from Seattle to be here. And thanks also to not only the students from Tohoku, but I also recognize some students that I've met in my few weeks here on campus, and I'm so thrilled to see your faces in the audience. In 2025, we have seen rare earths and also downstream products from rare earths, like permanent magnets, at the center of global politics. Following U.S. tariff actions, the Chinese government placed new restrictions on exports of these materials to the United States, which raised big concerns about supply chains, about clean energy goals, as well as defense readiness. So for many in Washington, D.C., this felt like a wake-up call. But this is far from the first time that rare earths and other critical minerals have been used, or at least perceived to have been used, as a tool of geopolitical leverage. Japan, in fact, has already been through this experience. And as in so many other areas of industrial policy, international political economy, social policy, domestic policy, Japan, I think, has served as a kind of harbinger state, facing challenges before the United States has or other countries have, and experimenting with responses that the rest of the world can emulate and learn from. So tonight I'm going to talk about rare earths and shared futures, U.S.-Japan cooperation in a new mineral age. More than 15 years ago, in 2009, shortly before when I think we entered what I call this new mineral age, I was in Tokyo and I was doing research for my PhD dissertation. I had a wonderful meeting with someone who worked on Japanese companies in China, in the China market, at a large business organization. So in 2009, when I first sat down with him for an interview, one of the things he told me very clearly is that I should not worry about how political risk or geopolitical conflict would affect trade, Japanese companies, or the way business was done in China. He said it was not a pressing issue. I went back and met him again in the summer of 2010 and had a very similar discussion. He urged me, very kindly, to study something else so I would have a better dissertation and a more certain career. He was really worried I was heading down a dead-end research path. But just a few months later, a Chinese fishing boat collided with a Japanese Coast Guard ship near the disputed Senkaku Islands, known as the Dialogue Islands in Chinese. Now, the crew and the captain of this fishing boat were detained. They were taken to Okinawa. And then a member of the Japanese Self-Defense Forces very controversially leaked the video of the incident onto YouTube, wrote a book about it, to have in my office if anyone's interested, this is a screenshot from that YouTube video. But that aside, this was a very serious diplomatic incident between Japan and China, and it's particularly notable, and it's particularly noted because in the midst of this territorial dispute, Japanese firms started reporting to the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry they were unable to import rare earths from China. At the time, China had almost complete dominance over global rare earth mining production. As you can see in this chart, which covers 1994 to 2010, at the time of, in the fall of 2010, when this collision occurred, 95% or perhaps even more of global rare earths were produced within China and then exported, used within China and exported. US production, right here, which before this time really had been globally dominant, almost as dominant as Chinese production in this more contemporary era, had dropped to zero. The last remaining rare earth mine had closed, and the rest of the world was hovering near zero as well. Now, why, they're called rare earths, they sound kind of exciting, but why does this matter? What are they? Why should we pay attention to them? So rare earths consist of 17 different elements, combinations of which are discovered and mined together, and then separated and refined in technologically complicated and often environmentally very costly processes. Today when we think of rare earths, there we go. Today when we think of rare earths, we often think about those that are used in permanent magnets, particularly neodymium, praseodymium magnets, or sometimes also samarium magnets. Many of these are central to next generation green technologies, particularly electric vehicle motors. I'm not going to talk about this diagram in depth, but electric vehicle motors, as well as wind turbine generators, MRIs for medical imaging, hard drives for computers. They're used in high-speed maglev trains. And of course, there are also, not of course, but there also are military and defense applications, although that makes up about 1% of total use. But rare earths also appear in more ordinary parts of daily life. There are plenty of rare earths in the room right now. For example, your cell phone, when it buzzes, because all of your cell phone ringers are off right now, right? They're on buzz mode. That buzz comes from a tiny little unbalanced rare earth permanent magnet motor, and that's why you get the little buzz in your phone. Or if you are, if you want fridge magnets that actually work, so your things don't slide down the fridge, you're using a rare earth magnet. Or perhaps particularly relevant for our Montana audience tonight, brakes and fishing reels are often also using rare earth magnets. So these things really, truly are everywhere. Now, rare earths are not actually rare. And this is really important for the story that will unfold about policy. The term dates back to their time of discovery in Europe, where they were indeed scarce and also just hard for people to extract and separate. This map, which is based on existing research from the U.S. Geological Society, as well as research I've done myself, shows different mines that are either actively being used or are potentially exploitable, right? That they actually have rare earths in them. And you can see that rare earths truly are distributed across the world. So we have most of the rare earth mining happening within China, as well as some in Southeast Asia, including Myanmar and Australia. But there's really potential for rare earths to be mined mined all around. So why is it so concentrated, right? Why do we see this 95 or plus% happening in China? So this is not geological scarcity or geological rarity, but it's rather scarcity that has been made possible through government policy. In particular, in China, through long-term planning, industrial policy, strategic investments, as well as a weak regulatory environment, especially in the 1980s and 1990s, lowered costs, especially environmental regulation costs, and this drove out international competitors, including the United States. So at this time, China not only built up mining, but also invested quite heavily in basic research, training of the next generation of scientists, rare earth separation and processing, and downstream in industries. So one indicator, just one indicator of these investments shows up in rare earth patents by country of origin. And this is based on some research I did for a project. So in the 1990s, we can see here that China only had a very small percentage, this dark little bar right here, small percentage of rare earth minerals. But by 2021, it was around 80% of total, right, new innovation, new patents. Just today, I was redoing this research to update it, and this trend has held through the 2024 data, but I don't have it to visualize tonight. So today, when we look at the rare earth, global market and makeup, so today, and I'll tell you, how we got, really, you don't want to see that slide. I'll just talk it through, maybe we'll get to see it. Rare earth mining is about 60% Chinese globally, but 40%, and this is not 40% of that 60, 40% of global rare earth mining is controlled by one company called China Rare Earth Group. It's even more if we look at processing, right, actually making the sediment into something usable. It's about 70% Chinese, of which 40% is controlled by one company. And then if we look at just one downstream product, these permanent magnets, again, about 70% of those are made in China. Now tonight in this talk, I'm really going to be talking about rare earths, but this pattern of geographic concentration spreads much more broadly. So intense geographic concentration is common, both in mining and in midstream processing. It's not all China. For example, we can see here platinum is dominated in mining and processing in South Africa. Cobalt is primarily mined in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but then is shipped to China, and that is where it is processed and then used within China or exported to other countries to use. And so in sector after sector, in mineral after mineral, we see this kind of pattern. Any interruption, be it geopolitical tensions, I'll return to, coercive economic diplomacy, or even a natural disaster like a flood, an earthquake, or God forbid another pandemic, puts these at risk. They put economic prosperity at risk. They put our investments in future green technology, digital transformation at risk. These supply chains are not crisis respondent. They're not resilient. So this is what I think of as a new mineral age. We have competition, perhaps conflict, over these new minerals that are needed for green technologies and the digital transformation, combined with this intense geographic concentration that raises the risks of supply disruptions. So this is something we know, right? So much of this, what I've shown you, is based on research that I have published. Others have published research on this as well. And so how have countries responded, and particularly what I'll come to at the end, how is this particularly relevant for US-Japan cooperation? So for Japan, the concerns about concentration and vulnerability date back prior to this age, to the oil shocks of the 1970s, as they do for many, many countries. At the time, policymakers began talking about comprehensive security that is non-traditional and economic security threats, things like energy overdependence or overdependence on a single market. Japan created strategic reserves for energy, including oil, at the time, as well as an agency that was tasked with securing access to vital materials. I'll return to that agency called JOGMEC. But the concept of comprehensive security didn't really start to take root until decades later in the wake of this 2010 rare earth crisis that I mentioned. At that point, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, during the crisis, denied that there was a formal or informal export ban. And scholars and observers still debate whether we actually had an export ban. You can ask me afterwards, and I'll tell you my opinion on that. But what matters, like really what we need to focus on, is that Japanese companies, as well as the Japanese government, believed that this did present a threat, and they reacted as such. Okay, so this was a perceived threat, even if it wasn't a formal government policy. So Japan's strategy in the wake of this crisis had three parts. First, to reduce the amount of rare earths that were used by existing industries, and this was funded through Japanese government grants. Second, to invest in research and development in recycling technologies, to take materials that were in existing products and to be able to reuse them, which was also funded. And the third was to diversify supply chains. The Japanese government, including the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as JOGMEC, the Japan Oil, Gas, and Metals Corporation, which is a state-owned enterprise. It's now called the Japan Organization for Metals and Energy Security in English. They all work to expand rare earth projects globally. And the map that is behind me here shows many of these efforts, including diplomatic. I should not be trusted with this thing. I'm going to put it down and then, yeah. Okay. So you see diplomatic projects in the stars, as well as JOGMEC investments. And you can see these are really broad, right? There's some in North America. Most of them are focused in Southeast Asia and the broader Indo-Pacific, Australia, India, etc. And some of these did succeed. In particular, there's a joint venture with an Australian company named Linus that does downstream processing in Malaysia and does provide a lot of rare earths and rare earth materials to Japanese automakers in particular. There are other projects on a smaller scale in Vietnam and India that still continue to this day. But many more of these projects never made it past the initial investment stage, so they are X'd out here. They turned out not to be viable sources of rare earths or simply not places where companies wish to pursue. In some cases, the political risk was too high. For example, the state stepped in and nationalized companies in some cases. In others, the profit margins were far too low once the prices of rare earths started to decrease from the post-crisis high. And this is very, very common, not only with rare earths, but across mining projects in general. Although perhaps especially in these rarer metals or critical minerals. Only about 1 in 20 rare earth projects that are initiated actually go forward to production. The failure rate is enormously high. This is a very, very high risk sector. It usually takes about 2 decades from initial assessment of a project to actual production. So you need to have a very long time horizon and a very high appetite for risk to succeed in this sector. If we expand this time frame out a little bit and look, so there's more minerals on this map, and this goes up through 2020, a few patterns stand out. And so there are some that are not continued on here. These are in light green. But we also see this very clear concentration of projects, especially the continuing projects in the broader Indo-Pacific region, especially Australia and Southeast Asia. So these sorts of projects continued into 2020 when, as we all know and we all experienced, global supply chains generally were deeply disrupted by the pandemic. In response, the Japanese government, including agencies I mentioned earlier, along with the Japan External Trade Organization, or JETRO, began investing more actively in supply chain diversification, not only away from China, but more broadly to the Indo-Pacific. They also tried to provide some financial support for Japanese companies to reshore projects back to Japan. A good portion of these projects, although not the majority, focused on battery minerals. Focused on battery minerals. Did my map already pop up? Gosh, I am so sorry. There we go. That's 2020. Get back to it. Focused in Southeast Asia. And you can even see there are even some logistics projects that involve companies in China. So you can see some of these diversify away from China projects actually went to funding some economic activity that went in China. So not a majority of these projects, although a good percentage, about 15%, do focus on battery minerals, on rare earths, as well as permanent magnet projects. And we can see, again, that it's really focused in this region. So, but really, perhaps more than any other country, Japan has started to systematically focus on the concept of economic security and of resiliency. In 2022, they started to codify these efforts in the Economic Security Promotion Act. And here we can see former Prime Minister Kishida preparing for this new piece of legislation. Now, the Economic Security Promotion Act has new mechanisms to do all sorts of things: protect sensitive intellectual property, support research for technology and core infrastructure, to provide government support for industries seen as essential for future prosperity, and also, and this has been part of the legislation from the very start, to ensure the security of raw materials, minerals, and these downstream technologies. So, did this work? Right? We have all of these efforts that were taken by the Japanese government. So, shortly, in a word, yeah, it did work. This is pretty neat. So I have a number of things. I'm going to zoom in on just two in a minute. But we can see here, this is showing a number of different minerals, and this is the percentage of these minerals that Japan imports from China. Here is where the rare earth crisis happens and the interventions begin, and you can see that percentage go down. And moreover, you can see it go down in ways that it does not go down for other minerals. And this sort of paired comparison is what really convinces me that something is going on here. So particularly right with lithium, we can see that Japanese imports of lithium went from almost complete dependence on US imports to now almost complete dependence on Chinese imports during the same period. But with rare earths, we see it move away from Chinese imports into a more diversified Asian supply chain. I will also point out, though, that in 2022, when supply chains were disrupted and there was very high demand for rare earths generally, that Japanese dependence on Chinese rare earths really increased. And this is really important, because the Chinese industry is very good at this. They have they're very good at processing and producing rare earths. They have a very, very deep bench of talent that they've nurtured over time. And so these geographic concentrations of rare earths in China exist for a reason. They exist for market reasons. They exist also for policy reasons, for education reasons. And it's just simply hard to compete with. Right? This is a real, not ephemeral phenomenon. So what about international cooperation, right? So how does that fit? So I really focused on what Japan did, but Japan did not do all of this alone. Now this incredibly messy map that did not come through very well on my slides, I apologize. Normally, these are cute little flags. Sorry. Sorry. You can still see what countries they are, hopefully. So since 2010, Japan and the United States have been central to nearly every critical mineral initiative. Now this is a partial list. I like this spaghetti because it shows that there's a lot of different stuff going on. Many of them overlap, some of them do not. But here we have Japan right at the center. There is one with Australia and Korea. They have an agreement that Japan isn't a part of, but Japan is really at the heart of almost every single one of these critical mineral initiatives. Right just months after the 2010 crisis, Japan and the United States had their first critical mineral summit. They had a meeting to talk about technological sharing, to talk about different ways that they could potentially pursue diversification together. Not all of those efforts worked out at the time, but that's okay. Most efforts do not, and over time, some of them have. So that was right in 2011. This early initiative later expanded to include Australia, Canada, the UK, and others. Some of those early initiatives have led to an existing institution we have called the Mineral Security Partnership that Japan and the United States are not only both key in, but have started to work on some joint projects. One of the most recent steps in the last years is the US-Japan Critical Minerals Agreement, which allowed Japanese batteries and minerals to qualify under the US Inflation Reduction Act. And this also encouraged further economic and industrial cooperation in the sector between the US and Japan. Beyond this bilateral work with the US, Japan, I think, has played a leading role in multilateral efforts, the G7, the Quad, the Mineral Security Partnership I mentioned, also the Biden-era Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which had a big focus on critical mineral supply chains. So Japan isn't in every initiative, but it's in most, and when it is, it's at the center of them. Globally, we've really seen a surge then in critical mineral policies. While Japan began drafting its first industrial policy on rare earths in 2009, in fact, before the crisis, other countries have followed. The United States has a critical mineral policy list. It has 50 minerals on it. Japan's has 34. More than 30 countries and the European Union have specific critical mineral policies and lists. You can see they really started to take off in this 2020 era. Right, Japan is way at the leading edge of that. And these policies include countries that are consuming countries, right, that use most of the downstream technologies, like the United States, Canada, Japan, as well as countries that are producing and mining these minerals, like Chile and South Africa. Most of these policies, include rare earths. About 80% of worldwide policies do, along with other high-demand battery materials like graphite and lithium and cobalt. Now here in Montana, we also have skin in this rare earth game. Studies done by the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology have identified numerous inactive or abandoned mines, as well as other sites with high potential for critical minerals. Montana, of course, has a very long history of mining. If you drive 2 hours east to Butte, pull up there we go. 2 hours east to Butte, you can see both, right, the wealth that came from this, but also the very deep scars of that mining history. On this map, you'll see that Montana holds potential reserves of many of these identified minerals, including rare earths, lithium, gallium, others we could talk about. Many of the minerals that are identified in these global initiatives and domestic policy strategies are found in Montana. Some of this could potentially look like new mines or production, but there's actually, I think, more potential to identify critical minerals and mining waste, existing mining waste. To take just one small example, China currently has a near global monopoly on germanium. This is a mining byproduct. It's key to manufacturing all sorts of things, including solar panels and some other products. And China has banned the exports of germanium to the United States since 2023. Germanium, potentially even economically viable germanium, is present in process waste in Butte. 18 of the 17 rare earth elements are also present in amounts that are potentially economically viable in the Berkeley pit and water treatment sludge. So this is something great. So when thinking about this, though, I can't also help but reflect on Senator Mansfield's own story. So he worked underground in the Butte mines before he came here to the University of Montana for his education. On the urging of his future wife, Maureen. And this launched him, of course, into a remarkable career. His life reminds us that behind every mineral, all these supply chains, all these policies are real people and real costs that individuals may not want to pay. And today, in 2025, as the US faces new restrictions on rare earths and permanent magnets from China, it's worth remembering that Japan has already been down this road and has responded. Japan has responded with industrial policy, with supply chain diversification, and with international cooperation. In many ways, Japan has been, I think, a harbinger state in this new mineral age, testing strategies, keep learning some hard lessons, and showing some things that work and some things that do not. For the United States and for US-Japan cooperation, this moment of potential cooperation in a tricky economic place is not entirely new. Ambassador Mansfield famously taught us all that the US-Japan relation relationship is the most important bilateral relationship in the world, bar none. This moment, too, I think, is a chance to build on what Japan has already done and to shape a shared future in which critical minerals support both our prosperity and our security. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions in the discussion.
I'm sure we have a lot of questions. I have a few from online, but I'm going to start with my own question. What about the sludge? What about this waste? What is happening in you to reclaim that? What are the opportunities for capitalizing on those opportunities?
Yeah, that's a great question, and so I've only been back in Montana for 2 months, so I in some ways will defer that question to our geologists. Maybe we have some in the room. But the Montana authorities and the state authorities have been doing some preliminary studies, and there are, for example, within the zinc in view, there are byproducts of germanium, and that's something that, with proper investment as well as the proper nurturing of talent, we can develop domestic industry to use the mistakes of our past to do better in the future. So at this point right now, it's largely studies for viability. And my read of those studies is that there are some opportunities there.
And if you could just introduce yourself.
Hi, Kristin. Reggie Spalding. I met Kristin at a swimming party a couple days ago in my neighborhood. Anyway, my question is, I'm curious about the processes for extracting those minerals and separating those minerals, and you talked about how that was a dirty process, and the prospects for doing that in a way that's not so harmful to the environment.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll speak to this in the sort of a broad policy sense rather than the technical sense from the area of my expertise. So both the process of initially separating the rare earths can be very difficult. Some of the mines, particularly in China, that were exploited to a great extent in the 80s and 90s have radioactive pools, and it's some real deep environmental damage. Since then, there have been a lot of improvements in how, especially the separation process as well as the mining process, and a lot of that innovation has come from China. And that's largely because starting in the 1980s, they set up government-funded labs to go all in and research this sector. And so now there are many, many thousands of PhDs that focus on rare earths and rare earth techniques. We also have some similar programs in the United States that do that. There's a critical mineral institute, I believe, at the Ames Laboratory in Iowa, for example, and there are some programs happening. But one thing that we can do, and I think is very important, both within the United States, but also in like-minded countries, is just to invest in talent and the future and basic research, so we can be good at those things and come up with the innovation that we need for our local situation. The other thing I'll point to is that the Mountain Pass mine in California, which is was the largest rare earth mine in the world before it closed down. It's been reopened under a company called MP Materials, and they are setting up a from mining through and recycling supply chain. And so they are investing in research at that site, and I think they're making strides.
So we'll go to a question from the virtual audience and then combine a couple. How have the trade war / tariff policies impacted the U.S.-Japan relationship, and what consequences will this have on supply chain stability for rare earth minerals in the future? And what frameworks do you think are most important to ensure that U.S.-Japan cooperation on critical minerals is sustained and effective regardless of political leadership?
These are great questions. So I will, I'll take them backwards, I think. So thinking about the ways to sustain projects, right, to sustain these initiatives. This is a very difficult question for, I think, diplomats and policymakers around the world in a global environment that has a lot of instability. And one of the things that my research has shown, and to be more effective, is to have initiatives that are deeply grounded in very concrete projects. So, for example, within the Mineral Security Project, Mineral Security Partnership, which still does exist in the Trump administration. Some things have shifted around, but the MSP is still here. There are very specific projects that are being done with public-private partnerships, with private companies, joining together. For example, there's one mining project that Japan and the United States, and I think also Korea, are cooperating with in Southern Africa. And so like that project, where there's a lot of initial work, there's a lot of commitment to it from the different parties involved, those are the kinds of things that I think have legs. Right? There can be a long-term vision, and there are a lot of different stakeholders from the private sector, from civil society, that will make those work, even as the political winds shift. And so I think really thinking about concrete projects and investing in concrete projects is one way to ensure that things survive. Those concrete projects, of course, are a lot of hard work to get them going. Years and years of hard work. Thinking about the tariffs as a secondary question, of course, it makes things harder. It's really impossible to think about that in any other way. It does not ease economic cooperation, and it causes economic hardship for the United States' partners and allies. And so with raw materials particularly, there are some tariff barriers that have been put in place. There have been discussion that they'll be higher. This could be an encouragement potentially for domestic mining in the United States, but is something that it's hard to see a boon for international cooperation from that. If I could ask something of the Trump administration, I would ask that countries that are our friends be treated as such. And Japan has been our close friend for a long time.
Go back to the in-person audience. I'm actually going to go to the student next to you. You can identify yourself.
I'm Hogan O'Donnell. I'm currently taking your U.S.-Japan relations class. My question as a resident or someone from Hughes would be why or how or what infrastructure is needed to extract those resources from mine waste, and I suppose additionally, why aren't we opening up more mines in, say, Alaska and other places where these rare earth minerals exist?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question, one of the things that we see, and if you go and you look, new mine projects, and you try and do sort of the newspaper search even, right, and go through and see what sorts of things are happening in the United States, that mining is understandably really unpopular. And one of the fabulous things about living in the United States is that people can say that they don't want it there and engage in discussion. It's like, can we do this in a way that people would be okay with? If no, maybe it won't happen. We'll stop it. There is open engagement, and civil society has a very large voice, which is very important and I think a very good thing. If I pulled up one of my maps from before, the projects that have succeeded for Japan, Japanese companies overseas, are in places that have that sort of civil society democratic engagement. The places where people have been able to say no and if they wanted to, and that there's been dialogue. In places that did not have that mechanism, those projects failed. And so, and again, most projects fail. So there have been projects proposed in Minnesota, in North Carolina, in Alaska, in California. There's some very new proposed projects in Maine, where I was before here. So all of those things, in fact, are happening, but it's very slow, and sometimes they're not viable projects, so they get 95% failure. And so your first question about infrastructure, I am going to defer to others, not knowing the details of the view situation well enough to do it justice. But, I would love to talk about it with you more.
All right, we'll go back to the online audience, and this fits very nicely. Are there lessons from Japan's approach to community engagement around resource extraction that could inform how places like Montana think about mining for critical minerals?
Yes, absolutely, and this goes directly to what I was just saying. That there is I found a very strong pattern in mining projects, diversification of mining projects abroad, that the ones that were more long-term successful were in places that had strong rule of law, strong civic engagement, were essentially were democracies. And those were places where many of the problems that can arise in this kind of very difficult, dangerous, dirty work can be, the appropriate stakeholders can be brought in from the beginning and can actually have a voice. Now there are examples of projects that don't work that are in countries like that, of course. But most of the ones that were tried and then failed were in places where there's just a really big social backlash because the local communities had no voice in it to begin with. And so one lesson is that rather than trying to seek out, we can go and do something where people can't say no, you should try and seek out projects. We're going to do this and see if people, and talk to people first. And if they say no and it's no, then it's no. Like that project's not going to work out anyway, or it's not going to work out in a way that will sit well with our souls. But probably it won't even be economically viable. And so one broad lesson is that. There's also, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned about methods of financing and different kinds of loans and things like this, but I'll leave that unless someone asks a follow-up question and wants to hear about financing.
Back to the in-person audience. Okay, I'll come back to you when you go over here in front.
Hi, my name's Owen Sears, and I'm a teacher here at the Mansfield Center. My question is this: you touched on recycling just briefly. I've got a box in my garage of PCs that go back to the year 2000. There must be 12 of them in there. And in order to get them recycled, I think I would have to pay like $500 at Best Buy. Is there realistically, there has to be stuff in these PCs that can be reused, including rare earth metals, materials, magnets and whatnot. Is there another approach that we can use to recycling that could meet some of the need?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the region, when I'm thinking about recycling initiatives and circular economy kinds of initiatives with critical minerals, I think that the place in the world that's doing probably the most dynamic work on this is the European Union, and that it's one of they put a lot of money into it. They have a lot of different initiatives. This is something they've been really focused on. As I mentioned, Japan did start looking at reduction and recycling right in 2010. So that's been part of the process. And I feel your pain about, right? It's like, I've got this stuff, I'm going to recycle it. So clearly, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. One of the things, again, this shows the need to invest in this now for something that will not come to fruition for a few decades. And in particular, if we think about things like, will we have enough rare earths that we can recycle, that we can extract from existing products, and then use to make these products I mentioned, these wind turbine generators and electric vehicle motors and whatnot. We will not have enough of the products out of circulation to recycle to meet demand for 30 to 50 years. So it's a long time horizon before we're even seeing the circular part of the economy come back. But that's why we need to figure out how to do it right now and get it more, really up the efficiency. And that's why, we need more research funding and training, and to train our scientists and train our geologists and our material scientists and our chemists, as well as our political scientists. Yeah.
So from the virtual audience, based on your research, how are China, Japan, and the US each leveraging state power differently to manage and control mineral supply chains?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll give the abbreviated version. For the extended version, read my book that will come out in about 2 years. But there are some really interesting similarities in that we see broadly international diversification, not just from countries like Japan, which are relatively resource scarce, but also China and the United States, which have more domestic resources, but are also looking abroad to sort of build this more supply chain resilience. China, as I mentioned briefly, has in some ways the benefit of authoritarianism, that they've thrown a lot of money at the projects and the training and the mines and different companies, and many of them have failed, and they have not had to face the voters and tell them, sorry, we gave your money to something that didn't work out. Which, of course, in the United States we do, and in Japan we do need to face the voters and say, yeah, we gave the money because we hoped it would work out, but yes, that one was a boondoggle, sorry. But in China, there has been, it has not been an efficient process. So there's been a lot of resources invested, and enough of them have worked out, right? That now we have the market system that we do in rare earths. In Japan, I've talked about the system. It's very multifaceted. Under the Economic Security Promotion Act, it's very much a whole of government approach that looks at many different ministries and lots of different state levers of power to all try and make this a more resilient system. In the United States, we do have a bit more of a specialized system, with more fragmented across different bureaucracies. And with particularly Commerce and Department of Defense and Energy really looking at what we can do domestically to build up our industry.
Andrew Wilcox, University of Montana Geosciences. Thanks for a great talk, Kristin. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on sort of building on this idea about how minerals can be sort of a source of geopolitical conflict versus cooperation, and tying that into efforts to address climate change, right? Because we think very much about, we need these minerals for electrification and various clean energy applications, but kind of bringing together the sort of geopolitics of minerals with the geopolitics of needing to work together to address climate change. I wonder if you could just kind of reflect on how you see those tying together.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. It's estimated that the demand for these minerals in order to meet the various goals that are set forth in the UN Paris Climate Agreement, some of them we need 60 times more than our current supply. Others it's only 5 times more, but that's still a lot more materials that unfortunately will not be matched yet in these through recycling or reduction efforts. And so this is really at the core of reading climate electrification goals, particularly, and potentially also the future of some of these broader climate cooperation goals. Now, in political science, I think there's really 2 different ways that people look at this. And the one is that competition over the scarce resources has kind of kicked into gear a race for natural resources, but also greater investments in the resources that would have happened otherwise. And so it has knocked a bit of the complacency away and actually accelerated some of this technology and resource use in ways that would not have happened without the geopolitical competition. And I do actually find that very convincing as an explanation. That said, I still think that greater cooperation, particularly greater cooperation with China on critical minerals, is absolutely essential to meeting electrification goals. And so we can do these things, we can do these supply chain diversification things and these resilience things, but it's still going to take a long time. And in the right now, we're still very dependent on a extremely efficient and relatively cheap Chinese supply chain. And that is simply the reality of the world, and in order to meet the climate goals, that's what I realistically think needs to happen, even though it's in conflict with our political pressures.
Okay, so we'll go to a student for our last question of the night.
Hi, my name is Olivia. I'm in your Politics of Japan class. With Ishiba recently out and the diet in flux, how do you think the rise of right-wing populist parties in Japan currently will impact U.S.-Japanese cooperation, specifically around rare earth minerals?
Ooh, what a fun question. Okay, so right now there's the current Prime Minister, Prime Minister Ishiba, has announced that he's stepping aside. The Liberal Democratic Party internal election will begin the campaigning on September 22nd, with I believe the election happening on October 4th. And then that person will become the next Prime Minister, unless Japanese politics takes an exciting new turn in the next month. But that is where I think we're going. And Japanese politics now is in a bit more flux than it typically is. There's a little bit less political predictability in Japanese elite politics than we have, I'd say, typically seen over the last 80 years. Sorry, 70 years. That first 10 years was very, very tumultuous. And so in that time, it's a really great question, like how might this affect U.S.-Japan cooperation broadly? I think that there are real ways that it could affect trade negotiations, for example, that are currently one of the most pressing issues, maybe the most pressing issue in Japanese politics. It could affect the renegotiation of the status of forces agreement, which determines how U.S. troops that are based in Japan, how that is paid for, and what the balance of responsibilities are. These are very, very important, both international and domestic political issues. In terms of critical mineral and rare earth cooperation very specifically, I think to some extent it's been institutionalized and professionalized within some of the apparatus of the Japanese government that we will probably see more continuity, is my guess, although I'm always delighted to be wrong.
Hey, before we thank Dr. Vekasi, I just want to wrap up a little bit about the Mansfield Center. So I want to thank you all for supporting the Mansfield Center. As I mentioned, we were founded by an act of Congress in 1983. In the last few months, since February, we have lost $26 million in federal funding. This is all funding that was specifically aligned with national security interests and with the support of our two senators at the time. So we are so fortunate to have the endowment of permanent funds from the government of Japan. So there's a few things you can do if you're interested in the Mansfield Center. One, keep coming to our events because we're going to keep having them. This has been a fantastic evening. Our next talk, the 2025 Mansfield Lecture, features Dr. Robert Putnam. It's this Monday at 7 o'clock here at the university in the University Center Ballroom. It is part of the President's Lecture Series as well. And it's about Dr. Putnam's research on the importance of joining, engaging community to support support our democracy. The next day, he'll be speaking to a group of 250 high school students coming from throughout Western Montana in a democracy forum, and we have about a dozen community members volunteering. If you'd like to volunteer, see me afterwards. But we do have a vibrant series of lectures. You can learn more at mansfieldcenter.org. 2, if you're interested in supporting the center, we do have a website where you can donate directly. 3, we are looking for ideas for continued opportunities for networking, programming, and support from our community in the country. So I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate Dr. Kristin Vekasi. Thank you for such an amazing lecture, and let's all join in celebrating her and thanking her. Thank you again for joining.